Oh, this is embarrassing because I actually watched the Oscar winner Crash,
Oh no.
and I was surprised that Cronenberg made that. Didn't seem like his style.
It's real bad.
Like there was a crash, and so I was ready for the sex to start happening, but it never came. It was just racial strife.
Yeah.
Just a lot of crying.
That's not as embarrassing as in 2006 when they accidentally presented the Oscar to Cronenberg for this movie. Kind of one of the more famous Oscar snafus.
Yeah. Cronenberg looked really embarrassed. It was weird he was even there, but great ceremony. Hello and welcome to Unwatchables, the film podcast for lovers of difficult or just plain crazy cinema. I'm Marc Dottavio.
I'm Seth Troyer.
And today we're discussing perhaps the most controversial film by one of our most controversial directors, the chronicler of everything depraved, disgusting, and often mutated about the human body. That director is David Cronenberg, and the film is 1996's adaptation of J.G. Ballard's truly shocking 1973 novel, Crash. Gentlemen, start your engines.
Oh my God, vroom vroom.
Is that a good one?
Marc,
Good.
you just kill me every time. He's just trying to one-up himself every single time.
It's going to get wilder every time. Just
Man,
wait.
You naughty little fag.
I was waiting
All right.
the entire time to hear whether you were going to say start your engines or buckle up.
I
knew
was
it
going to
gonna be one of the
say,
two.
get out your beige outfits and your bad hairdos. I just so
You think the
beige.
hairdos are bad in this movie?
Well, just spaders.
Not the classic Spader cut.
I was
that's
like,
why I do the
literally,
introductions. That was pretty long.
Holly Hunter does have a bad haircut. I will.
I like
Another
her
point
hair.
in your favor. You do? Wow.
Everything about her, I'm in for it. I want her to tell me horrible things all the time. She can tell me the worst things. No, I don't know. I just kept on Googling the whole time during this movie, like why everybody liked beige so much in the late 90s. Doesn't everything kind of look like Seinfeld is happening like down the street at the same time as
Did you
this?
find an answer when you were Googling that?
Oh, they had like some little think pieces or something. But
Okay.
they were rather unhelpful. I thought there would be like a lot more like, there's probably some like fancy college thesis out there about this. I want to find it because I've always been so puzzled. It's maybe the ugliest time there ever was. And for a movie that's about cars, ugliest time to own a car. They're the ugliest cars of the
Truly
the
unwatchable.
1990s are the worst looking cars I've ever seen.
Not a great time. Well, on that note, let me introduce our very special guest today. We have Andrew Swafford, one of the founders of Cinematary, whose weekly podcast Seth often appears on. I popped in once to talk about Titanic. It is
Right, you did.
quite a good podcast. Everybody should check it out, as well as cinematary.com. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, very happy to be here. Very happy to be talking about a movie that I think is compulsively watchable. I am glued to the screen when Crash is on. But I guess it is a controversial film.
It can.
It is controversial.
It could clear out a room, but it could also bring people together.
Yeah, that's the room I want to be in.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if I want those to stay in the room if they're not down,
That's right.
I know some weird things going on in those rooms in this movie. But yeah, I think this is a good time to be talking about David Cronenberg in particular, because he does have a new film out, Crimes of the Future, which I have not yet seen.
Ooh, I loved Crimes of the Future.
I want to see that.
Oh man. In many ways, it is kind of a remake of Crash specifically. So I think your feelings about this movie will probably determine your feelings on that movie.
Ooh, sequel.
Well, that remains to be seen then. We'll see.
I can. I'm seeing the glimmer in Mark's eye already. I can already see what's happening. But Andrew,
Well, yeah.
would you call yourself the director of Cinematary Podcast?
I would
The
not call myself the
Führer?
director.
The-
I think the director would have to be Zach, who's on every episode of the podcast and edits the podcast.
That's true.
But if there, I'm maybe you could say I'm the producer, but that implies that I edit, which I do not.
Well, he's not here now, so you can take all the credit.
You're like the hot lady on the hood of the car.
I'm the hot lady on the hood of the car. He drives the car. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you flip off of it.
All right.
I've always appreciated Andrew and his podcast. It was the first podcast I was ever on. I never even like listened to podcasts really. And then I just was like looking for a place to write about films, and I was like, basically a place to write about Plague Dogs, because I just had like a big old I just really wanted to type about Plague Dogs all the time because I love that movie a lot. And
that was like a very like interesting timing, because we do these series on Cemetery where every 4 or 5 weeks we kind of switch gears what we're talking about. And we happened to be doing a series on international animation at that point, and you just emailed me and said, hey, I want to write about Plague Dogs, and you wrote a great essay, so I wanted to keep you around and invite you to come on. And what was the first episode you were on? Was it Son of the White Mare?
No, it was, that was the second one I did, which was also like a dream come true. But the first one was Hedgehog in the Fog, and
Hedgehog in the Fog, another great movie.
Like 3 by that guy, and his other one that's really long and like it's like epic and stuff. And somebody out there will remember his name, but that was like really awesome.
Yuri
so
Nordstrom,
fun to get on there and talk about. Yeah, there you go, Norstein or something. But yeah, and then I just kept on coming back, and it's been fun. I don't. What would you say?
Seth was on multiple Shrek episodes.
Oh yeah,
and we did our
me and Zach
series
just chilling talking about Shrek. You gotta listen to it.
And we ended up talking about Plague Dogs on this podcast, so everything came full circle.
Sweet. I'm just gonna start another. I'm gonna start a Plague cast, just talking about Plague Dogs. That's all.
Plague Dog Minute.
Well, maybe you'll tackle Crimes of the Future if you haven't already on some future episode once everyone else gets the opportunity to see it.
Mm-hmm. I've talked about it in one of our recent episodes, because we do kind of a split structure where the first half of the episode is just people talking about what they've been watching in the last week, like whatever. And then the second half of the podcast is talking about a focused topic like you guys dedicate a whole episode to here. So there's an episode a couple weeks back where I gave a pitch for why people should see Crimes of the Future if people want to go dig deeper into that.
All right. Well, then Cronenberg is in the air. And I would like to talk a little bit about his other movies before we dive into Crash, because, there's a lot of them that I really, really like. And anyone who doesn't know, he's a Canadian filmmaker, director, writer, who specializes in horror, sci-fi kind of films. But over the years, he's branched out into like psychological dramas, did a gangster film, other kind of weird little, genre pieces or adaptations. And he's still releasing films to as recently as this year. Crimes of the Future opened at Cannes. So, but he goes all the way back to probably his first really feature length legitimate movie was Shivers back in 1975, which really came right out the gate to tell you pretty much everything you need to know about David Cronenberg. He jumps right into the body horror.
Is that the vagina
which is
armpit?
Really his thing. That's Rabid.
Okay.
That came right afterwards. But those two films I did just recently rewatch, and it's really cool to see him as this scrappy young director, and they kind of remind me of like early George Romero films in that they have a lot of let's say amateur type actors in them and lower production values, but he quickly started making more commercial films, at least for a brief time. I know even Rabid became one of the highest grossing Canadian films of all time, which kind of helped him cross over into the US.
I did not know that.
Man, Canada's so cool.
Mhm.
Wow. They like that. They're freaks. They're freaks.
Yeah, and then he went on to, movies like Scanners actually started to have some success in the States, and then he had kind of a brief dalliance with more like mainstream Hollywood with movies like The Dead Zone, The Fly, and yeah, I'm interested to hear what your general feelings are about David Cronenberg. If you have any favorite films,
Yeah.
least favorites,
I would
what's your
say
favorite?
that I really love David Cronenberg, and my appreciation of him has sort of only recently kind of become a thing I've realized, because I've seen a lot of his movies over the years. He's one of those directors that like he has so many movies that you could see 8 of them and still not even like be close to having your arms all the way around it. But when I recently watched Crimes of the Future, that kind of got me on a bit of a Cronenberg kick, and I went and watched Existence, and I went and watched Dangerous Method, and it just kind of got me thinking about how this guy is one of the only filmmakers, maybe the only filmmaker, to kind of like create his own subgenre of horror, in the same way that like Lovecraft did in the early 1900s, right? Like new kinds of horror don't come around all that often. So like when you said that term body horror earlier, and like everybody knows what you mean, but like that wouldn't really be like a concept in like horror culture, if not for this guy.
Yeah, you could use the word Cronenbergian, and most people will know
right.
what you're talking about. One of the
there
few
aren't that
filmmakers,
many filmmakers you can do that for. Yeah,
Crony.
Yeah. What about you, Seth?
I would describe myself as a crony, for sure. He's like an early example of me finding my leg and footing in horror, I think, because I was like skeptical at first about horror because I was a little pretentious teenager cinephile or something. And I when I was also growing up in the worst time like of like horror movies were like just real trashy and stuff, at least in the mainstream, and I didn't understand what was happening. I was dumb. I was blind, and he's sort of like this blurred line, like it's horror but it's surreal. It's about science some of the time, and oftentimes it's about sexuality, which is always like really of interest to me as far as like art and sexuality and how they go together. I love that he's an artist who's like extremely unafraid to put his preoccupations or
Can I say something about that, Seth? I know you guys recently did an episode of this podcast about a couple of porn films, and I read y'all's Letterboxd reviews about those, and I forget who it was. I think it was you, Seth, talking about how like you want erotic films to actually be erotic and not like be interrupted with like jokes or some sort of weird contrivance, right?
Right. That was the toss up for me with a lot of them. Which was just like I was enjoying it a lot when it was trying to be a movie. And then I would be like, oh, yeah, now it's just a movie. And it's doing well at being a movie. But it's like losing the other half.
I agree. And I think that one thing that's great about Cronenberg is, like you said, he's unafraid to kind of just focus on people's experiences of sexual pleasure. But he also does it in like, I think, a genuinely erotic way. Like even if you do not, even if you do not find the act or the object you are looking at to be erotic, like the way that he films it and the way that like the score and everything comes together generally like gives that impression anyways, right?
Yeah, you like to see, at least I do, I like to see somebody like sharing something that they're into, even if I'm not into it or something, right? I can at least see like, and even if it's not sexual or something, just like show me your records. Maybe I don't like them, but I will enjoy you pontificating about how much you like these or something. Yeah. And I think my favorite's probably Naked Lunch, and that's probably my favorite out of all of them.
My favorite is Crash, but second favorite would probably be Videodrome, followed maybe by Crimes of the Future.
Cool. I haven't seen Videodrome in a while, but that's like the big old jewel in the crown. I feel like that people like talk about the most. with
It's
him.
great. Yeah.
But yeah, I haven't seen it in a while. I'm not sure what I'll think, but I'm curious. I need to watch them all like again. And there's a lot I haven't seen. I think Existence is one of those that just like a lot of people haven't seen. Spider.
It's good.
Is that Spider? That's Ralph
That's a real.
Fiennes?
I watched that years ago. I remember not thinking much of it at the time, but I think I have seen all of his movies except the newest one.
My weird uncle.
But some of them
one.
it's been longer than others. I did just watch Videodrome again recently. I tried to watch all the movie of his again that came out before Crash. And we're all over the map here, I guess, as far as our preferences. That shows how wide his filmography is, and that there's not really a consensus about what the best one or even ones are.
No one has even mentioned The Fly, which I think a lot of people would point to as his masterpiece, right?
Yeah, and I think for me, there's The Fly, Dead Ringers, and everything else.
Yeah, Dead Ringers is so good. That's definitely in my top for him.
Man, I struggled with Dead Ringers when I watched it. I found it a little dull, but I think I maybe watched it in the wrong setting or the wrong frame of mind.
I just rewatched it and blew me away. It might be my favorite. It's really tough between that and The Fly, though, because I think that I don't think that he's ever done movies that quite marry the emotional side into the intellectual and horror side like those movies do. And Dead Ringers in particular has Jeremy Irons doing this dual performance as twins, which is just one of the most astonishing performances, in my opinion, in any movie. Besides it just being seamless, they're just like two distinct great performances, and they look exactly the same. He does nothing physically to distinguish them, and you can always tell who is on screen. And
it makes you wish there were two Scars in Lion King.
Yeah, and I think that's a good... Looking at his work with actors is a good way to start getting into Crash, too, because, he's had some kind of wonky performances in his early movies, especially in Scanners, which is still one I really enjoy. But he started working with people like James Woods in Videodrome, or Christopher Walken, or Jeff Goldblum, or Jeremy Irons I was just talking about.
Am I the only one who thinks they all kind of look like him? They all kind of got like flappy skin.
They all kind of look like what?
Him, like David Cronenberg. If you like look him up, he like looks. They're like very chinny. They're lanky, and they got weird skin. Like I feel like I'm amazed that he hasn't really worked with Willem Dafoe yet. But that seems like they're all cousins.
He should work with Willem Dafoe. He works with Viggo Mortensen a lot.
That's
History
also
of Violence, Dangerous Method,
skin.
Crimes of the Future. Yeah.
Well, now he's moved on to people he wished he looked like. And that's where Viggo Mortensen comes in. But no, I think you have a point there. There's kind of to an extent, there's like a type of lead actor in his movies. Even Peter Weller in Naked Lunch kind of has a little bit of that.
Yeah,
I don't know. James
I always
Woods,
wonder
Jeff
if it plays
Goldblum,
into his
the big forehead.
Yeah, it plays into his fetishizing everything and making it all about like, well, maybe this is somebody's script, but it's actually me like having a weird fantasy in front of you or something.
And I think in addition to some of these actors looking a little like David Cronenberg, now that I'm thinking about it, there's kind of a type of personality that the lead characters tend to inhabit too. Like it's generally like a very stiff kind of guy who over the course of the movie like has their worldview shaken up or expands their horizons or something like that, right?
Definitely. They're very chilly and removed and intellectual at a certain point, and then they either turn into a fly or they got a big vagina opening in their chest.
Yeah.
Surprise you.
That's where we go. So for Crash then, I think no matter what anyone thinks of the movie, that has quite an impressive cast, and it's actually the biggest award he's ever won in his career was for this movie at the Cannes Film Festival, where they gave it the special jury prize, which is not an award they give out every year. It's basically up to the jury to say like, well, this isn't going to win, the big prize or anything, but we want to give some special recognition to this.
You got to hand it to him.
Yeah.
Francis Ford Coppola was the head of the jury that year. And he awarded it to Crash for, and this is quote, for originality, for daring, and for audacity. although he did note that certain jury members abstained very passionately.
I would have loved to overhear that conversation.
Oh man, yeah.
Tony, can you look up who else was in the Cannes jury that year with Coppola in,
Oh, yeah,
I guess,
I wanna know.
96? Because I would love to speculate on which one of them abstained very passionately.
Yeah, let's see.
Let's just give him a second here. We'll edit all this out so it seems like it's instant and he just knows.
Yes,
I've got the list here, and you guys will know who these people are probably.
I don't really
more than
recognize
I will. I don't
any of
recognize
these names other than Francis Ford Coppola.
There's
Some wet blankets.
Michael Ballhaus. Why does that name sound familiar? Yeah, who knows?
Wow. Well, then they just Coppola could have just.
Oh, Adam Egoyan. Hang on, Adam Egoyan's in there. Did Exotica, The Sweet Hereafter.
Oh, I've been meaning to watch Exotica. I've never seen it.
Oh,
Yeah.
and that's going to come in. That I'm going to bring that up during this conversation too, because Elias Koteas is in that movie, who plays Vaughn in this film, and
Interesting.
it almost seems similar. There's no way Adam Egoyan was the one who abstained.
No,
way.
definitely. I can't see him doing
Okay.
that.
He was
Can I ask a
jacking it.
question to somebody who has seen that guy in another movie? Is Cronenberg like making him just look like a corpse in this movie, or is this just kind of how he looks in all of his films?
He is not scarred like he is in this
Yeah.
movie. He's not looking his best in this.
He's just very pale and bony, and like he just looks like he's gonna keel over at any moment to me.
Yeah, I would cross the street.
Yeah, for sure. So anyways, it was a very controversial choice that year. To recognize that the movie itself was controversial, and we'll talk about all the reasons that it is, but I do want to address the book real quick, which is by J.G. Ballard, came out in 1973. He's an English author who's probably most well known, at least cinematically, for Empire of the Sun, which is kind of like an autobiography of him growing up in Japanese-occupied Shanghai. Spielberg
Christian
movie.
Bale playing J.G. Ballard. Yep. I feel like J.G. Ballard has like, I don't know if he's like really, he's lucky to get Christian Bale to play him as a little kid. I bet he was a pudgy little lame-looking kid, and I don't think he looked anything like James Spader in this movie, who is supposed to be J.G. Ballard, right? But
so in the book, is the
up.
character named James Ballard?
Yes, and
okay, I was wondering.
What? Yeah. So it is him
doesn't
jacking off.
Yep, and
so
that's a really
cool.
strange thing here, is that the narrator is supposed to be J.G. Ballard. However, he's like a television producer, like he is in the movie. So it's strange where it's like he's using his name and saying it in the first person, but he's not the J.G. Ballard that we know.
It reminds me of Franz Kafka and like all of Kafka's novels having a protagonist named Joseph K. And the K, I think most people assume, stands for Kafka.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good comparison.
Yeah, he was a big old science fiction guy. Like very influential in science fiction before he started getting into more like abstract stuff like Crash and Atrocity Exhibition. But before that, it was like Drowned World and High Rise and more of these like groundbreaking science fiction, but nothing like this, like which ventures they start to venture more into like Burroughs territory or something.
For sure. I had no idea he was such a freak. Like from all this other
non-derogatory.
Yeah. Because I did read the book in preparation for this, and it is quite a ride. It is more, I mean, for lack of a better word. And
I want that to be your blurb on the back of the book, Mark.
Which one is more quote unquote unwatchable between the book and the movie?
I think the book definitely is.
Okay, wow.
I found the book to be deeply unpleasant.
Is it just because you have to sit so long with the descriptions of this stuff?
Yes, actually, that's exactly the reason. It's only 200 pages, and yet sometimes the long, endless, repetitive descriptions of semen and anuses and car dials and steering wheels and things is unpleasant in a productive way, and then there's a certain point where it starts to get exhausting. And when I was trying to kind of speed through it to get it done in time to watch the movie and talk about it, that was a rough time. This is really something to read like 30 pages at a time, and maybe should have been a novella or a short story or something.
Wait, question: did you watch Crash for the first time for this podcast and do all that prep for it?
Not technically, because I did watch it many years ago, but I honestly remembered almost nothing about it. So it really was like watching it for the first time. In fact, when I was reading it, and we have this character of Vaughn, who is this, fetishist who chases car accidents around and kind of recruits them into his little, sexual group. I was picturing James Spader because James, I mean, between like this movie, Sex, Lies, and Videotape, and Secretary, he was like the pervert laureate of the 90s.
Yeah, what's his deal?
And it's turns out in the movie he plays the J.G. Ballard character, who's kind of the one who's inducted into this after he survives a car crash, starts having an affair with the wife of the man that he killed in the car crash accidentally, and then he just gets kind of sucked into this whole world that circles around this Vaughn character, who is obsessed with car crashes, with sexualizing them, and in particular in the book about trying to fantasize and orchestrate a car crash with a famous film actress, which is Elizabeth Taylor in the book, and is something that's left completely out of the movie as far as I can tell, where he is actually trying to target somebody because he is is getting this erotic thrill out of it.
That's cool.
Yeah, so I'm not really reading the book. It was just like, boy, I don't know who saw a movie in this. Apparently it was Cronenberg. I'm not really sure what to make of it. It's very, I don't know.
See,
it's compelling page to page, very well written, but the whole point of it and how it all hangs together seems dubious to me.
Do you think that reading it dampened your experience of watching the movie because you were kind of like worn out by this stuff?
It may have, actually. Although it also might have, I mean, it may have made the movie seem less shocking because...
Yeah. I put this on with a friend, not really knowing like what it was going to be. Like I had an idea of what it was going to be, but I didn't really know what it was going to be.
Dude, he makes horror movies, bro.
And when they left my house that night, they asked, was that a date that we just had? Like, because I mean, it's just a very singular experience to have with somebody, just like to watch Crash unfold, not really knowing where it's going.
Was it a date?
It was not a date.
And then they just slammed the door. And I read like 50 pages of the book, not because
that's about the right amount.
Mark, I don't know. We're a little different because I'm just not slut. I'm just really.
Dude,
really
you want my copy? You can have it, bro.
I want it. I really.
It's yours.
I'm more slutty and gross than you. But and I'm also slutty with books, and that's why I didn't finish it because really I loved it, but I just wind up. I work at a library.
Can't be monogamous.
Grabbing something else, and then I start reading that one, and then I grab something else, and I start reading that one. But I was very curious about the impulse of making it a movie, because as much as it's like describing visual things and it's like very like it's like paragraphs of fetishizing things, it's more like poetic, and like so much of it is mental, so much of it is going on in the characters' heads, like, which is true to like what sexuality, and like a lot of it is what you don't see, a lot of it is what's on the page, and that is kind of what's funny to watch the movie. There's like that's where the staleness comes in with like sort of the mystique comes in with the movie, where it is just like everybody's so like deadpan, dead-faced very often.
There's like a hypnotic vibe to the whole thing,
and you're often like, how did we go from 0 to 100, right? Like with like, but I imagine, like from what I gathered from like the bit I read, it was like, this is what's going on in their heads while this is going on. And it does add something to the movie for me, that like you're realizing that there's like from the get-go, there's all sorts of crazy things like going on behind the like dazed look on these people's eyes.
Yeah, even not having read any of it, I think that there's like so much that's like obviously being unstated in every single scene. Like each character is kind of coming at the experience from a different direction or through a different lens based on the various thought processes that you can kind of tell they're going through.
Yeah, the book is very much about the perception of all of these characters and not very plot driven. And that's a problem with a lot of adaptations. The main problem, in my opinion, is that, when what makes a book great is this interior monologue, is the prose, is the way that it's putting you into a headspace that can't really be translated visually, and you kind of got to bring something else to it in order to make a movie successful. And I mean, I don't think Crash is any exception as far as that goes. That there is that element is definitely lost, and it's pretty much the everything as far as the book goes. But we'll talk about exactly what the movie does. And it's just to close off the book conversation, it is a pretty faithful adaptation to the bones of everything that happens pretty much are there, with the exception of this whole film actress element that's taken out. So yeah, let's dive in with Crash. We talked about James Spader, who is this guy who shows up after the character played by I'm sorry, the James Spader is the one who gets into the car crash with Holly Hunter, who we also already talked about, and he also has a wife played by Deborah Kara Unger, who is from The Game. I think is the only thing I really knew her from, and
she drives me wild. She just drives me crazy.
Man, I was wondering if we were going to break the seal on like referring to actors as attractive, which feels like relevant to this movie.
Help it.
But like,
I mean, she's almost superhuman. Like
the first shot of this movie is like this like we're floating. The camera's just floating through this aircraft hangar, and then it just like ever so gently lands on the like impossibly perfect body of Deborah Kara Unger. And like you're listening to this like very hypnotic Howard Shore like experimental guitar music, and it's very erotic. IMO.
It is.
First thing we
like
see is her pressing her nipple against a car.
That's right.
Yeah.
A plane. Because she hasn't really like none of them have really, or her and James Spader have not like activated the kink yet. Like they haven't really gotten it. They're just doing what's referred to as hot wifing. Are you guys familiar with hot wifing?
Sure.
Am I?
Yeah. For listeners who do not know what hot wifing is, it is like the practice of a married couple having one party go have sex with someone else and then come back and then like tell the story of that in an erotic way. And that's like the dynamic of James Spader and Deborah Kara Unger's characters at the beginning of the movie. It quickly shifts into a different gear, so to speak.
They're both hot wifing, right? Yeah,
they're both hot wifing. Yeah,
yes. Has a lady while he's filming some sort of commercial or something, and they both meet up on a balcony and talk about it together. And fuck on the balcony. But the whole time they're like looking down, and there's like, if you didn't know anything about the movie, it could already be like a weird thing that like we're lingering so often on the highway just beyond them, and they seem to be like already gazing on it, which is this thing. Like, I agree that the kink isn't activated yet, probably, but sometimes I find myself like I get like halfway through this movie and I go backwards. I'm trying to like, wait, when did this happen? When did this start? And really, like, it's really hard to diagnose. Like, it's like, as far as like, I mean, there are instigating factors, but everybody seems kind of like they're already like, maybe not directly thinking about like this specific kink or whatever you want to call it, but they're already like dwelling on some like wildness, some like otherworldly wildness. They're in a weird place that like you kind of realize pretty quickly, which I think is kind of interesting about it. Like that it isn't this like necessarily like James Spader is like a normal like everyday guy and all of a sudden happens into a sex cult or something like that. It's not that movie.
I mentioned earlier that Crimes of the Future feels to me like kind of a remake of this movie. And in that movie, the sexual fetish that is kind of awoken among the human population is a fetish for surgery, because it is taken place in like
because it's a Cronenberg film.
Because it's a Cronenberg film, but also like there are reasons why. Like it has to do with the trajectory that we're on, as like the way that like humans are consuming microplastics, and that could potentially like deaden our nervous system and stuff like that. And so people might attempt to like seek erotic thrills in like more and more extreme ways, right? Like in our world, like biting is a thing. So like extrapolate, some sci-fi concept 100 years out. And like, what is the most extreme version of that? But the reason I brought it up is that like in that movie, there's kind of this slow, subtle unfolding of like characters realizing they're into it, right? Like they're into it before they know they're into it, right? And eventually they have to like be honest with themselves that they are.
Yeah, I see what Seth is saying, because I mean, the characters start out already very like chilly and remote, and I feel like they kind of only go further that way the movie goes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I mean, when we open with them, they pretty much are already in a healthy either open or polyamorous relationship. I mean, like they're using these sexual experiences with other people as a way to enhance their own sex life.
Right. And every time you see James Spader have sex with somebody who's not Deborah Unger, I think it hard cuts to him then having sex with Deborah Unger at home. Like it is drawing a line. Like we're not showing you the scene where he tells her about it, but he told her about it, and that's why they're having sex right now.
I love following
right.
that.
So like they already have their games that they're
one,
playing.
Yeah, it's like one act, like for him.
Yes.
And quite often, it also seems like, well, I don't know. I'll talk about that later. But yeah, I don't know. I love that Cronenberg starts us already so far from a regular safe place for a straight audience, right? Most movies would just start with the hot wifing or the like sexual experimentation, and that would be the whole movie, right? And like, or they would have to work,
or they'd get to that point,
right? They would have to get to that point, right? Which this is just like already like shutting out like a lot of the audience, and a lot of the audience is like reaching for like something that is to hold on to, and there's no like quote unquote normal center like from the get-go, and it just keeps going, and it's exciting for that reason. It's everything your grandpa was worried about.
It is. And my basic read in this movie is that it's a very queer movie. Like it is about people stumbling into not just queerness, but like a queer community, and like becoming connected with a network of people, and having like to like completely reorient their lives around this thing that is like important to them. But then also this movie comes out right at the tail end of the AIDS crisis. And so the idea that like this community could be like in constant danger, or this could be a quote unquote dangerous lifestyle, and that'd be like a thing that people are just kind of stuck with, feels like it has this adds this core of sadness to the movie too. Like it feels like it's simultaneously like kind of celebratory of like the sexual diversity on display here, but also like mourning it like prematurely, right?
Yeah, and that's part of what I struggle with here as far as what the arc is to this movie, because the characters seem like they don't particularly need awakened to anything when they start out, and they already are in a way not actually queer, but it's a pretty kind of liberal relationship thing what they're already doing that you might associate with a queer lifestyle.
Yeah. Well, they have same sex, they both, don't they both like he fucks
I
Vaughn
think,
and
well that's what I was going to say, is that like I think that is the answer to your question, Mark, about what's the arc of the movie. A big arc of the movie is James Spader coming to terms with his own sexuality. Like there are scenes in the middle where Deborah Kara Unger is fucking him and like dirty talking him about like, don't you want to be with a man? And she's like telling him to respond to him, like he doesn't want to say it out loud, but he's kind of getting closer and closer to climax the more she says about it. He's like not being honest with himself about what he really wants until later he actually does, like actually do it with Vaughn.
Well, and on the other hand, the thing that they're getting into is centered around violence and even taking other people against their will involved in these car accidents. Mm-hmm. So that's another kind of strange, metaphor. If you want to look at this as like an AIDS thing, this is something that is darker than that as far as what they're actually pursuing.
Well, I mean, like people have unsafe sex, right? That you could do it. You could probably do the car thing very safely, as Vaughn does with the actors and the audience and stuff like that. Or you could be a little reckless, which people are when it comes to their like horny brain. And of course, like we also didn't have a lot of protection about things like that, or like spread of HIV specifically in the mid 90s, right?
Yeah, I see it as
so is this a cautionary tale, or
I don't know if I would say it's a cautionary tale.
I think it's it's like a cartoonish exaggeration to like celebrate that oftentimes these alternative sexual acts, sexual communities are deemed by the outside, like they at first, like you're growing up, at least I like when I was like a little good Christian boy growing up, like S&M, gay relationships, all of this stuff that's like quote unquote taboo, is like literally dangerous, and like as dangerous as something like this, like as like people liking car crashes, that's as ludicrous as like someone liking being whipped could be, or someone liking watching their partner being fucked could be, right? But then you start to, if you start to get into such things, you start to realize like it really opens, like it really blows your mind. It
so much
flips everything on its head.
Yeah,
because everything you thought was one way, it's the other way, and you wonder like maybe other things like are not what I thought, and all of this. It's very exciting for that reason, and especially sexual awakening in general, which I think a lot of the movie is just about that kind of.
Yeah,
I guess the tone that I get from this movie, even before we get to the end point, is more fatalistic than celebratory.
That's
so
interesting.
That's
sure.
Where I.
Celebratory is probably too strong of a word. I think that like maybe humanizing would be a term, right? Though I mean that's kind of a weird thing, because like queer people don't need to be humanized; they're already.
I'm going to stick with celebratory. It's a
I
party.
feel like Cronenberg feels.
Don't invite me to this party.
I feel like he has some sort of a kinship to these people, right?
Yes. I think.
Sure.
No, never mind. I lost it again.
Well, I just wanted to lay a little more groundwork here, just for anybody listening who doesn't know that the
it's really
Holly
hard
Hunter
not to
is the
jump
one
into the
that
subtext.
So he hits
so hard.
Holly Hunter and him start hooking up after he essentially kills her husband in a car accident by accident. Holly Hunter,
and it's filmed like a
Raising
sexy
Arizona,
scene.
The Piano, great actress.
It's filmed like a sexy scene. The car crash. It's like it's very stylized and
well,
intense.
her boob pops out.
Yeah, her boob pops out.
Almost, like I would argue that almost every scene in this movie is a sex scene. But not everybody involved knows it's a sex scene, right?
Because once again,
and
it's this
honestly, almost literally every scene is a sex scene. But
it's like this opening of the can of worms, where after a while, it's just like feels like everything the camera touches, right? Now that like car crashes became fetishized, like who knows what else like. That I'm looking at could be fetishized in some sort of way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the term the male gaze gets thrown around a lot in film criticism, and like in many cases, like in ways that it was not originally intended to be used. But like the idea that like a camera can linger on a particular body part or a particular sensation, and fetishize that, is something that Cronenberg uses to fetishize like whatever he wants, right? Even if it is not like explicitly sexual on the surface.
Oh yeah. And
Well, yeah, and let's talk about Elias Koteas, who is
Mhm.
the central figure of as far as being obsessed with all of this stuff. And like I said, he is in Exotica, and he spends most of that movie like doing these monologues like to an audience at a strip club. And I couldn't help but think of that when he's basically doing like another monologue just like that when they're reenacting this James Dean crash,
Mhm.
Right.
which is a scene that I like. It's a
wild.
very good introduction to him, that he has this stuntman crony basically who helps him reenact these car crashes illicitly in
Well,
the
before
night.
that,
And
you see him as a
you know,
like posing as a doctor in the hospital where
Right.
James Spader is staying,
yes,
and he's like, you wonder like what he's doing. I don't know if
Well,
he's for
what
real, and
he's
he's like
doing there is
actually
he's
stealing
Holly
the
Hunter's
photos.
partner. Yeah.
he actually is a doctor. That's clearer in the book.
Oh,
Oh,
really?
he
I didn't know
is.
that.
But in the book, he was like a TV doctor who got into this big car accident that kind of derailed his career and turned him into this freak. And I was kind of surprised we don't get any of that backstory unless I missed it in here, as far as like what got him into this. What was his big thing? How did he meet all these other people besides? I mean, we do get a little thing like, okay, here's the accident I met this girl
Mhm.
in, but
Well,
it
it's
doesn't
like
really go into that.
it's like Seth was saying, we don't really get anybody's backstory, right? We just kind of
No,
like
we don't.
pick up on all these
Super
people's
faceless.
lives, like for this snapshot of time, and like they have lives that obviously span past this too, but like we're just getting that glimpse. Interesting structure.
And he has a great batting average of finding people who get into car crashes and then suddenly their entire life revolves around how erotic they find them. Like he's got this whole group of people. This
Mhm.
guy and his wife are both turned on by it, and the girl that he hit. And you know, they hang around and they watch crash test videos and touch themselves and touch each other during
Well,
them.
it's set in a parallel universe where that is a thing that like lots of people are like secretly into, right?
Yeah,
Like
it does
there
seem
there
to
can
be
be
that
an
way.
event where like people can fill up bleachers for this, which is also a thing in Crimes of the Future. The one of the main character, Viggo Mortensen, is like a performance artist, and he like gets surgery on stage, and he just like fills up these stadiums of people who come basically to get
Oh.
off watching him do that.
See, that's what I was wondering, because there is like it's real subtle with how it addresses that, but it's just like how far reaching this what would be viewed as a problem is, right? Because there's the scene where Elias, the Vaughn character, reenacts the car crash of James Dean, and they really do it, and it's like crazy, and everybody's watching it and stuff, and you're they the cops show up and stop them, and they all like run like it's a drug
Also
bust or something.
it feels very queer too, because it's reminding me of like the Stonewall riots and stuff, right?
Mhm.
That there where or any gathering of queer people could be busted up by government force.
And he alludes to not the cops, like he's like, why are the cops like here or something, and he's like talking about some other, like it's the Bureau of Transportation or something like that,
Right.
like there's like a greater conspiracy, like there's a greater overarching, like
We're in a
possibly,
sci-fi world. Yeah.
yeah, where this is like maybe happening all over the country or all over the world, and that it's like something that society is trying to drive back or something, like it. But
Mm.
I like that it's real subtle like that. It doesn't go
Yeah.
full concept about it.
It feels like exactly the amount of information that you would experience if you just kind of got beamed there, and had to just, exist in that world for a little while.
Right. Or if you just like, started going out to gay clubs and like didn't know anything about gay history, you would just be like,
Right.
whoever tells me whatever is what I know, because it's literally alternative history.
Yeah, I mean, it does. You get the sense that like they have tapped into like an underground culture, right? Like there's straight society, and then there's this society that is running like parallel and underneath, kind of very, what's the word I'm looking for? Surreptitiously.
Good word.
It is a good word.
Yeah, and I guess I don't know. It seems more to me like a Fight Club or something. That's there is. I mean, there is something dark and perverted about it in like an objective way. That's this is something, you know. Our main figure here, Vaughn, is a disturbed person. He is antisocial. He tries to kill people at different points. He tries to hit James Spader and then later him and his wife. That there's a story here of obsession and of unhealthiness going on in here, which is I guess where some of the muddling comes for me as far as the art going. That every reading that I try to put onto it then is complicated by something else that makes that particular reading not quite come together for me. That this is supposed to be like a descent where they're getting too far in over their heads, which is not a queer story. And I also don't think that it particularly commits to that sense of the characters being drawn in or things getting out of control. And maybe what I was looking for was what really does appeal about this to them. And I guess lacking that stuff from the book, or the way that everything's just left in the air like a mystery, like these people are just into it. I'm not sure that Cronenberg really gives me that in the filmmaking, as far as showing me what is so seductive about this skeevy pervert.
I don't think
seems like a fucking weirdo and not somebody who is. He's like the opposite of seductive. He's
right.
Creepy.
He's a corpse.
And weird.
He's
a corpse.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like
it almost seems like he's just kind of reveling in the grotesqueness of it for its own sake.
But I feel like that's kind of the same thing with like someone who would be straight being like, well, that's the whole thing. Like guys are ugly, right? Or like they're hairy.
Right, but they're wrong. I think they're right to think that in this movie.
I don't know.
So
I could definitely stretch my imagination to understand like why a car accident would be like exciting, or like even like, or why like I could dream up a person, because there's been plenty of people who have like gotten off to like very morbid things, like even more morbid than this, like fucking Jeffrey Dahmer or something. But like,
wait, instead of jumping to Jeffrey Dahmer, can we look at some like more real world examples of like people enjoy fucking in cars, people enjoy getting roadhead, you know, like this is just kind of one click further than that, right? Where like you're doing near misses and like driving recklessly and like getting your adrenaline to that like panic state.
Or stalking people who are in car accidents and photographing them secretly and stalking them. Okay,
so about the Vaughn thing. I think that he is like, you know, unequivocally like the most, I don't know, fearsome person in this movie. I don't necessarily want to call him a villain per se, but I think he's kind of like the cause of some of the tragedy in this movie. And I like to think of this more as a tragedy than as I think what you're framing it as, which is a cautionary tale. I don't think that Cronenberg showing us a queer subculture like being like plagued by death is a thing that he's doing in order to warn people not to be queer. I think he's like trying to give us an actual empathetic like portrait of that experience, like but doing it through this kind of sci-fi conceit that lets us keep it at arm's length.
Well, yeah, and I don't think that he's doing it in a way that is queer negative. That's just why I think that the queer reading doesn't entirely hold up with the movie. Is what I'm saying. Not that he's doing it in a derogatory way, but that he's doing some counterproductive things if that is what we're supposed to be taking away from it.
What do you think's counterproductive though?
The way that it's so much about the darkness and the depravity of it, and that's like the point. of what they're into, and that this character who's introducing them to this world is disturbed and
I mean,
unhealthy.
in a story that was literally about AIDS, if it had a antagonist or a some sort of malevolent force in the movie, wouldn't it make sense for maybe that character to be someone who kind of recklessly has sex despite knowing they have AIDS or something like that, right? Like I think that Vaughn's character is sort of that like unsafe sex haver, basically.
Right, but then that's a whole other thing. Then it's like, okay, why are we watching the movie about unsafe sex haver purposefully spreading AIDS? Because that's what gets him off. That's not really a great queer story.
We are following the story. I mean, I don't think it has to be a happy story to be a queer story, right? I think we were following the story of a straight couple becoming involved in a subculture, and then like there being kind of this threat in that subculture that they then have to navigate.
Yeah, I think maybe blowing it up to subculture, like we there's queer readings that are maybe
Sure.
Maybe start and stop, which is that's always my thing with like readings of, I don't know, reading into things in general. Like I pretty much always realize that like sometimes it's me seeing it, sometimes it's them seeing it, and sometimes it was them seeing it for part of like what they were working on, and then it stops and becomes something else. Which I could see certain things working that way. But it's definitely what happens when you join an alternative subculture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, well, I mean, we're really getting into the mud here. If it hasn't become clear, I'm not a big fan of this movie.
No.
And I think part of the problem just cinematically is that I think it is important that it somehow communicates what is appealing about this. And again, the book is just pages and pages and pages of prose and poetry and lyricism about exactly like these fantasies and everything. And without that, a lot of this movie to me is just a lot of shots of people looking at cars, having sex in cars, driving, crashing cars. It doesn't translate any of that.
So it doesn't compute for me. Like I don't feel like I want an explanation of why they find it sexy, right? I just want the filmmaker to attempt to make me feel like it's sexy. Like put me in that headspace, whether I understand it or not, right? And I think that the way these scenes are filmed is very erotic. Like the camera will just like there's a scene when James Spader gets in the car with Holly Hunter for the first time, and he's like caressing his seatbelt, and like the camera is like right over his shoulder, close up on that seatbelt, and like that is an erotic scene where no sex is actually happening, right? But it's like making that association in our head between the car and the sexual experience.
No, right. I totally agree with you on that instance, because that did stick out to me. It stuck out to me because it was like one of the only times I felt that.
I want to agree with both of you in turn. So like,
you got to choose sides, Seth.
No,
this is a battle to the death.
All right, I agree with Andrew that I don't need explanations, and that like I don't think any of us really need have real explanations for why we like what we like. Like we can write book after book about like why we might like something, but it won't like really explain it to someone who doesn't get into whatever it is that I'm into. And it doesn't really matter. We won't ever get to the bottom of like human sexuality and what we really want. But I definitely agree with Mark's point, and it is like a low point for me as far as like the movie is concerned. I don't even know if it's a low point, but it is a point of like I could get why you would chafe on this movie, because it is it's kind of like real straight-laced sometimes as far as like the cinematography and filmmaking itself. It's very clinical, and it does like you would think they would be shooting this in a very lyrical, like poetic way, like maybe like weird lights and stuff, even because they're like sexualizing everything in such a way. But it does get to a certain point where it is just like, and this is both where like I feel like I understand why you would leave the room, but also why it's like at least interesting in theory to me very much, that it's like this movie that it starts to really feel like a movie that is for people who like getting in car wrecks.
Yeah.
It feels like a literal
Absolutely.
porno.
Is that what we've learned about Andrew?
That is not what we're learning about Andrew.
But after a while, like the story, like Andrew brought up earlier, that like I think as it goes along, you get less and less. There already wasn't very much to these characters, but you get less and less like in between moments where they're going to their jobs or whatever it is that they're doing, and it starts to just like be totally non-linear, and it just like cuts from like sexual car crash scene, just like, and then like jump to the next thing, and we're just like in the middle of this next sexy act that they're doing, and there's not really anything lining them, and it almost gets the idea, sorry, I'm going on too long, but it almost gives you the idea that they are it gives you a window into their mental space. I think that their lives outside of this world of fetish are starting to mean less and less to them.
Right.
But yeah, it is really weirdly clinical, and maybe it's the beige, maybe it's all the gray clothes and the gray skies.
I mean, as somebody who really likes slow cinema, I think that the way the camera will just like hold shots for a really long time, and like kind of slowly glide into a set.
I like the glide,
like it does in the first shot, like it does in the scene where Deborah Kara Unger and James Spader are fucking, and she's like trying to get him to talk about having sex with men. Like that is just almost just one shot of like them having like a full session of sex. Like I think like the patience of this movie, in terms of like clinical is definitely an accurate way to describe it, but I think like the more positive spin is it's kind of like patient and brooding or something, and that works for me anyways.
Yeah, and that's probably, I mean, that's like I guess a personal preference, because he does in general have kind of a purposefully kind of sterile, distanced style. And I think maybe that, for me, that wasn't a good match for this material in particular.
I think that what makes it feel not like sterile and stale to me is probably Howard Shore's music. That guitar score is incredible.
It is very moody.
I don't even really know how he made those sounds. I think like that just kind of makes the whole movie into this vibe.
Yeah, it's like a guitar orchestra that he used. It's a in the same way that like Glenn Branca, which like was an influence on like Sonic Youth, is like a New York, like he like made these guitar ensembles of like dozens and dozens of guitars, and like rather than like a regular orchestra. And Howard Shore is doing this with this in a really interesting way. They're all like hitting like different notes, sometimes harmonizing on the same note, but it's just like ringing out with all this sustain. That's
and like the guitars are all like playing very high pitched notes, and they're very tinny sounding. Like the guitars sound like broken glass or something, but it still has this like swoony harmony to it. Actually, I noticed this time that I think the only scene of the movie where the music gets truly sad, like kind of unequivocally sad, is when James Spader approaches Deborah Kara Unger, like on that hillside after her car crash, where he's not sure whether or not she's dead in that moment. Like then there's like an actual orchestra playing a very sad note, but the rest of it is this weird ambiguous vibe that I just coast on through the whole movie.
Yeah. Well, you know, I wanted at some point here, I was trying to find some sort of passage from the book that I could read. And I'll try to keep it brief here, just to kind of, I don't know, contrast what we're seeing on screen, and maybe just give an idea for anybody who's curious about like the way that this whole like thing is written, like the whole idea behind it.
Sure.
Good idea.
There's a scene in the movie where there's this character played by Rosanna Arquette who is in like leg braces and is particularly kind of disabled from her car accident, and she's into all of this stuff too. And at some point, I mean, pretty much everyone kind of ends up having sex with everyone in this movie.
Yeah.
And at one point she does end up with James Spader. So this character Gabrielle, this happens in the book where he is, the two of them are finally getting together, and it's a good example of how all the sex scenes and stuff are written in it. And it jumps around a little bit, and Tony, feel free to just go ahead and edit this if this is too long, but I'll try to make it go quickly. So, as I unshackled the left leg brace and ran my fingers along the deep buckle groove, the corrugated skin felt hot and tender, more exciting than the membrane of a vagina. This depraved orifice, the invagination of a sexual organ still in the embryonic stages of its evolution, reminded me of the small wounds on my own body, which still carried the contours of the instrument panel and controls. These were the templates for new genital organs, the molds of sexual possibilities yet to be created in 100 experimental car crashes. I explored the scars on her thighs and arms, feeling for the wound areas under her left breast as she in turn explored mine, deciphering together these codes of sexuality made possible by our 2 car crashes. I dreamed of other accidents that might enlarge this repertory of orifices, relating them to more elements of the automobile's engineering, to the ever more complex technologies of the future. As I embraced Gabrielle, I visualized, as Vaughn had taught me, the wounds upon which erotic fantasies might be erected, the extraordinary sexual acts celebrating the possibilities of unimagined technologies.
Man, I don't think I would like to read 200 pages of that, but that is some prose.
It is so awesome.
And then in the movie, he's just fucking her in a car. And I got nothing out of it. He's just fucking her in a car. And
that's the thing.
I don't know. That's just in a nutshell, kind of.
Well,
and maybe that's because I was coming hot off the book. But
licking her scar and stuff.
But then it's just gross.
Really
it's not I don't know, interesting. Too much of it ended up being tedious for me when I feel like that is not what he meant.
I guess it's just kind of your mileage may vary thing.
Yeah.
I guess I see it as it's interesting. I don't know if it really sustains me as much as a viewer as if it would have been more stylized. But it's interesting that it's a very different take than the book, right? So that they aren't totally trying to show you the mental life. They leave that to the book. So now what are we left with? We're left with this sort of, what it actually looks like, right? There's the crazy William S. Burroughs type sex that they're having in their heads, and then there's the actual act of what it looks like, which is often really kind of awkward.
Sex is hilarious.
Yeah, a lot of it's
you ever just watch 2 people have sex? It's silly.
Some of the time. Sometimes it's not. It depends on your outlook and I don't know. Maybe at the beginning of the movie I wasn't feeling it, and then after a while I was getting a little hot and bothered by certain scenes. Maybe not this scene, not that scene, but this scene.
Right.
So therefore, as I went along, I don't know. It depends. I was getting seduced. I get seduced by the movie after a while.
Right. I think that's what this movie and Crimes of the Future are kind of trying to do, to suck the viewer into its orbit and see if it can make you one of these people too.
I do think I would love to see more style to this, I guess. A little something, but again, it's interesting as is in a stranger way, actually, I guess.
I think it tries a little bit in that car wash scene where he's driving him through a car wash and he's cool having sex with his wife in the back. And, there's a few shots where he kind of amps up the noises on the soundtrack of the things dragging across the windshield, shots of the water. Again, in the book, it makes a little more of a, there we go, flappers. Yeah, and in the book, it's a little more of a parallel between the imagery of the white suds on the car and and the sex going on inside, and I could see him trying to do some of that in that scene.
That seemed cool.
So maybe that's a good example of that.
But yeah, I get that some of them are sort of some of them don't land or something. But maybe that's like, again, sort of, as it is just like what's going on. They're just in cars. I love the first time him and Holly Hunter have sex. It is like the most fumbling, like little sex scene in the
Yeah,
car, as awkward as sex in a car can be. I also love that
there's so much
he
logistics around like the steering wheel being in the way and stuff
I'm
like
just like,
that.
oh, there's like
Um,
all these problems we have to work through.
but I
He
imagine
also
that's part of the appeal for them, you know, kind of like people who like being tied up or something, like not having full control is part of what's enjoyable at having sex in that location.
I always was waiting for them to address the fact that he comes really fast, it seems, with like everyone other than his wife. It seems
Hmm.
like,
He's too
I don't know.
excited, man.
It seems like everybody, yeah, I don't know.
Well,
I
in a
just
lot
felt
of
like
the
there's a lot of scenes where
synopses,
he just comes real fast, but then he's like with his, we get cut back to his wife and him, and they're going for a while or something.
yeah, in some of the synopses of this movie that I've seen, they frame it as a man trying to rekindle his relationship with his wife. So I don't think there's enough information in the movie to really say this for sure, but it's possible that they're doing the hot wife thing just to kind of spice things up because they kind of like can't stay interested in one another or something like that. And this is just kind of a ramping up of that.
Well, the fatalistic reading of this movie, I think, kind of works with that. That
Yeah,
it
these are
is like
two
a
people who are like
crazy,
not supposed to be together or something.
or even just like all these characters are like these like really intense. Like this is how far how far you can go if you just keep following your id or your sexual obsessions, right?
Hmm.
If you're
And
just
it is
totally
like you're right. It's the
unbridled and
only
totally
thing in their
free.
lives that it has taken over everything. There's no
Mm-hmm.
balance there. You know.
Again, everything your grandpa warned you about.
Well, your grandpa warned you of some sick shit.
Yep. These gays are gonna start fucking cars next.
What's next? A man in a car?
And that's literally the movie. I love that about this movie. It's just like, yes, it is, Dad, and we're
Have
in
you guys
love.
seen Have you guys seen Titan or Titan? Is maybe how you say it?
No, what's that?
No, but people always compare these two movies.
I heard people talking about whatever that movie is called and comparing it to Crash when it came out, and I saw it and did not think it was anything like Crash.
Don't they
Um,
actually fuck cars in that
there
movie?
there is a scene where a woman actually fucks a car. It's like kind of a it's a conceit. It is a suspension of disbelief thing. Like you have to believe that she can be impregnated by a car, and it like
I
never gives you
believe.
any sort of explanation for that. But I didn't like that movie at all. And like the thing that you guys are complaining about Crash as like not being erotically filmed or stylistically filmed enough, like Titan is just super gross, like super unpleasant, super abrasive all the time. Um, so, I mean, I think that Cronenberg is at least attempting to kind of like sway things in the more seductive direction, right? Whether or not he always lands for each individual viewer, I guess, is subject to their perspective, right?
I could go with that. I mean, if I could see it that they are what I'm calling stale, are they're just kind of filmed maybe like soap opera sex scenes, right? They're like or something, the soap opera version
I don't know what soap
of
opera you're watching,
yeah,
Seth.
the soap opera version of people who like car crashes, which is kind of
Seth has
great.
never seen a soap opera.
It's kind of great in that way. I love that.
Actually, I remember when Crimes of the Future opened at Cannes. I remember
Mhm.
reading in the news, and I just pulled up the quote here because Viggo Mortensen was talking to like a reporter or something, and he said, "quote In my opinion, no offense to the director of Titan, but Crash was head and shoulders above that movie because it wasn't just about superficial shock value and unconventional imagery. There was a story beneath it, much more
He's
in than
right,
Titan."
and he should say it. Yeah.
And people were like, "Oh, look at him beating up on Titan."
Poor
Yeah, I mean, I feel like
Titan.
Titan is kind of a shock value movie, to be honest. But I see what people are talking about when they try to interpret it. It doesn't feel like it quite comes together for me. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess say what you want about this one. I don't think that it is about shock value. It
No.
I just always go back to it is convincingly a sexy movie about car crashes, and for like debatably for hypothetical people out there who might be interested in this.
Did anybody even really think there was anything that like disturbing or extreme in this movie?
It's
Because
really
it didn't
not.
strike me
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah, I
Not
mean,
as
a
far
lot
as
of
what we
Cronenberg
see.
stuff can be pretty firmly put in the horror category. But this does not feel horror to me. Like, I think the conceit, if you explain to people what the movie is about, they will recoil and, freak out a little bit. But there's not like scare scenes in this movie, right? Because we're not supposed to find this scary, I don't think. I think we're like, as the viewer, like the experience you're placed in is you're torn between like your instinctual revulsion to some of the images you're seeing and the way the film craft is trying to encourage you to reframe it and thinking about it in a different way.
I'd call it a
Yeah, 'cause-
spooky steamer. Steamy.
Yeah,
spooky.
I can't imagine. I don't know, anyone who like stormed out of this movie or anything. Just makes me think like, dude, what kind of movies are you watching? Like, this isn't. It's sexual. It's definitely explicit sexually. But that seemed to be the most boundary pushing thing in it to me. It was the shot of her like lifting her hand up and there's semen on it.
I doubt there were many movies at
was
the
cool.
Cannes Film Festival in 1996 that had as much sex as Crash, or even like to that point.
I think it's just the squeamish feeling that probably audiences, especially like just very straight audiences, going into this movie, that again starts at poly, like sexually experimental, and then goes from there. And again, just feeling, I think people are really, I don't know, they're really suspicious of sexiness in movies, especially if it's at the heart of it. They think it's like, well, this must be just frivolous, right? If there's
exploitative.
Like if there's eroticism in like a movie, it's like immediately like, well, then this is just for fun or something. And like, even if it is, like, what's your problem with it, I guess, is like the thing that I always ask. But
I think that's gotten even worse in recent years. Like,
I agree.
Any movie you go to see in the theater now, like a wide release, you're not going to see a sex scene at all, most likely. Let alone the kind of explicit stuff you saw in like the 80s and 90s in these movies.
Right.
Like Body Heat or something. Like, there's just people just section that all off now, and if they like kiss in a superhero movie, people think it's provocative.
Well, Crash was also the era of the erotic thriller. So you could kind of slot it in there.
Yeah, it's like all sorts of sexual experimentation are like encouraged and celebrated, but like don't actually talk about it and don't actually show it to me. Like, that's like the era we're in right now, and it's really lame.
Yeah. Well, I do want to give a shout out just to the whole cast of this movie, because I do think it's very well cast, and the actors put everything that they can into it. And I mean, with people like James Spader, who is just amazing in pretty much anything that he does, and I think Elias Koteas is great, and Holly Hunter.
I think Patricia Arquette is such an underrated actor, period. She doesn't get a ton to do here, but the things that the scenes that she has are really good. Like the scene where she seduces the like car salesman guy is really good.
I forgot that was her. What?
Yeah.
Or Rosanna Arquette.
Rosanna Arquette, not Patricia Arquette.
Yeah.
Sorry. They're related, right? I think they're related.
There's all kinds of Arquettes out there.
My brain was freaking out.
But she completely like sells Scorsese's After Hours, and she's great in what's the movie with Madonna?
Truth or Dare?
Desperately Seeking Susan.
Oh, okay.
So that is one name that I wanted to make sure got a shout out before we passed over it.
This is one of the most 90s casts you could ever have. Like, if Rosanna Arquette and Elias Koteas and Holly Hunter are in your movie, it was made in the 90s.
It just needs Jim Carrey in it.
Now, see, that's a movie that sounds interesting to me.
Jim Carrey.
You want Jim Carrey to be in Crash?
I want Jim Carrey in Crash.
I don't. I do not want
as
that.
Vaughn.
I thought
that would
Vaughn
become
kinda
like
looked
the cable guy.
I kind of feel like they're in the same universe, along with Seinfeld.
I could see it.
It's all happening. I will say, at the heart of this, my first exposure to this movie, I was super into watching movies. Okay, sometimes people watch porn for fun on their own. I don't know if you've heard of
It's
this.
been known to happen. Yeah.
I do this, and I've done this. And for a while, I was really into just like purely movie scenes. I just wanted them to be well shot and just to be like that thrill that I never got as a kid, because like anytime anything like close to a sex scene, like we're shutting the movie off, right?
Yeah.
So then I would watch them all now on Pornhub or whatever. And the first time I saw any part of this was the scene where James Spader and Unger are fucking in the bed, and she's talking about like, and I'm just like, I don't even think I had like the audio up very much.
Oh gosh.
But it's like real hot, and I've wound up watching the clip a lot, like multiple times. Like,
it's a great scene.
And then I think I finally watched it with audio and realized like what crazy shit she was saying. Like she's like talking about like how semen is salty and how she wants him to sodomize, And I think
they do speak clinically. Like they say penis and anus and sodomize.
Oh man, it was an awakening moment. Perhaps in my bisexuality too. Just hot lady telling me, you probably like some of that stuff too, though. And I was like, I can't believe Miss Unger.
I almost forgot to even mention that Vaughn and Ballard have a sex scene in this.
They do. Oh, we talked about it. We talked about it.
I said he was gay.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but like to really go into it, I mean, and I read this in the book, where he, again, like everything else, graphically, anally penetrates him, and I'm like, all right, if this movie is really that transgressive, they better have this scene in there. And I mean, they do. It's the least graphic of any of the sex scenes in it. Like, they cut away at the right moment, but
that was probably a MPAA thing, if I had to guess. Like, you can go so far. There's a double standard, right, for what is kind of allowed in Hollywood. Even today, I don't think you see gay sex between men on screen.
Oh man, no way! It's such. But I think I watched the Internet Archive version of this movie, and it may have cut that out, because I think the one I saw, it was just like he was getting ready to get fucked in the ass, and then they like cut away to them being done.
I mean, they basically just show his face as if like it seems like it's happening, or not. Yeah, like it's happening, and then it does cut away right after that.
Also, Seth, you're watching the Internet Archive version of Crash. There's a beautiful Blu-ray from Criterion that you should watch.
I watched this in Ultra HD today.
I just was paying for cheap internet, okay? You know how it is.
Go to your local library, Seth.
I don't know where it is. Maybe they'll employ me.
All right, well, any final thoughts about Crash? And we do like to ask at the end of each podcast if you would unwatch this movie. And usually the answer is pretty clear by the time we get there, but but if there's anything else you want to throw in too as we wrap up the discussion.
I would only unwatch this movie to then rewatch this movie again for the first time.
I would second that. I think it's maybe best the first time, but I don't know. I like it a lot.
Yeah.
It's not super high on my Cronin list because it is just like, I don't know. It's just so is what it is. And I don't know. I don't always have a window in or something. For some of it, I get like lost in the sauce, and then I come back and I'm like full on all about it. And not like I'm like, yeah, I don't know. That's how I feel about it.
I'm just going to put in Dead Ringers again when we're done here and dive back in there. I might unread the book.
Yeah, I think
it's going to take me a while. It's going to take me a while to just get out of that headspace.
That does sound
exhausting. I'm so glad I don't have to read it anymore.
Yeah, you also kind of made it. You made it a task for yourself, right? You were trying to squeeze in a whole novel and this challenging movie before like having to present on it. So I feel like that puts a certain amount of pressure on an already very intense experience. Might be worth coming back to at some point.
I don't
Yeah,
know. I think
sure.
I know Mark. I don't know that Mark would like this movie. I just wouldn't think
I
it's
don't
a
know
movie
Mark,
for Mark.
so apologies.
But I don't know.
Well, we'll
I could
see.
be
Again,
wrong,
you can
Mark.
have my copy of the book, and we'll see. Maybe that changes your perspective.
I don't know. I'm a freak. You should definitely read Naked Lunch 2 days before we watch Naked Lunch.
Oh my God.
I love
Yeah, I don't.
Naked
Yeah.
Lunch. That one I did finish.
I have never read or watched Naked Lunch.
Do them both.
Maybe one day.
DP.
Tony, were you
Sorry,
going to throw your
this
weight
episode has gotten out of
behind or
hand.
in front of Crash?
You've been
When he just
quiet.
popped out of the ether.
Everyone knows I have to remain neutral on the actual movies. I just wanted to point out that I think as of this episode, more of our guests have chosen the unwatch option simply so they could watch the movie again for the first time than guests that have just truly wanted to unwatch something we've made them watch. So we gotta clarify the rules and regulations the next time we do this.
Yeah.
The
Sorry for
unwatch
being
is permanent.
cliche.
There's no going back. No, clearly we're just picking movies people are enthusiastic about, and would just like to see again with fresh eyes.
Right.
But
You gotta make the choices more dangerous.
I
This
guess
movie's too
so.
watchable.
too watchable.
Yeah, it is. I think most people could handle this movie, whether you like it or not. I don't see what there is to be afraid of, unless you
don't
find
know.
yourself,
Again,
having sex in the car wash.
I think
if you got some real like sexual, like purity culture, sexual repression shit, this would be a tough sit.
Yeah,
Oh, that's true.
those folks, obviously. But I think also even just more liberal folks just might see this as just like, after a while, like it has nothing for me. Like it's alienating. It's not so much
Yeah.
as like, this is even all that gross or like I'm offended or something. It's just like,
Mm-hmm.
what is happening? It's like, it doesn't want me here or something. And that's
Right.
part of what I like about it, I guess.
That's a good point. Well, maybe more people encounter it on Pornhub in clips, and that's an easier way to approach it.
Yeah, I will email it to you, to your Hotmail. The clip.
Yeah, send it to my secret account.
I'm sure it's like just labeled. It doesn't say anything about David Cronenberg. I'm sure it's just labeled like blonde hot chick totally gets boned. That's the funny thing about all those.
Yeah, just search for that on Pornhub. I'm sure you'll find it.
Yeah, just type. You'll find it
I'm
eventually.
sure there's not many other videos like that.
It'll be like a full-length version of Crash.
I don't think they follow the Directors Guild guidelines of crediting the cinematographer and the screenwriters and everything.
Doubtful.
That's left to your imagination. All right, well, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah,
and
thank you for
bringing
having
your
me.
perspective to this film. And I definitely want to encourage everybody to check out Cinematary, the website and the podcast. Is there anything in particular you wanted to throw out there, let people know about?
I'll just give people an idea, basically, of what the show is like. I mentioned at the top that it's kind of a dual structured show where we just kind of talk about new releases and things we're watching, but then we also have some sort of an academic focus we're placing over the course of 4 or 5 weeks. We do these series, and every summer we do a series called Young Critics Watch Old Movies, where we study the film canon through the decades. So we start with an English language movie from the 20s, then we do a foreign language movie from the 20s, and then we alternate back and forth for every decade from like the 20s to the 80s, I think. And then when we're not doing that, we're jumping back and forth between like different director series or genre series, or sometimes just like thematically connected things. But it's a fun time. People should check it out. If they like this podcast, they will probably like Cinematary as well. And Seth is on it quite a bit. Which we're grateful for.
I pop in, talk about movies that have not come out recently. Everybody else is up on their recent films, and I talk about some random thing from 1993. It's fun. I love being on Cinematary. It's my favorite.
We love having you.
I love having
All right.
you here, Andrew. It was so good to have you here.
My heart.
This was wonderful, and I think probably before we get to this point, Tony will have found a good editing point to stop.
Okay, I'll go ahead and stop mine.
Yeah, we'll be good there. And then let's.
Unwatchables is produced by Tony Scarpitti, hosted by me, Marc Dottavio, and Seth Troyer, with artwork by Micah Kraus. You can find Seth and I on Letterboxd under Marc Dottavio and Sloth Troyer. You can also check us out at unwatchablespod.com for links to our Twitter and Instagram, or support us on Patreon for bonus content and to have a say in what we watch. Thanks for listening.